Okay, before we get started, there are some announcements that I have to make. Good morning, Evergreen Park School District. First thing I have to make sure that I communicate to everyone is that we are all able to sign in. It is very important that Dr. Carlson has the sign-in sheet that everyone who is here has signed in for proof of your presence. Proof of your presence. Before we get on with our speaker today, we are starting a little bit late. I wanted to take a moment to say thank you to all of you. As I am standing here in a room full of educators, I am very, very aware of the work that you do. And I want you to know that even though many of you do not work at EMS, I appreciate the work that you do because I know how difficult it is. So thank you for all that you do. And with no further ado, I'm going to begin the introduction of our keynote speaker this morning, Dr. Lionel Allen Jr. In addition to his work as the founder of Ed Leaders Matters, Dr. Lionel Allen Jr. is a clinical assistant professor of educational policy studies at the University of Illinois at Chicago, where he teaches a signature pedagogy course on cycles of inquiry and co-leads the full-year residency course for aspiring school leaders. Lionel has over 20 years of experience as a teacher, assistant principal, and chief academic officer. He is an education reform consultant, principal coach, and frequently invited speaker. In 2005, Ernie Duncan selected Lionel to become the first turnaround principal in Chicago public schools in Illinois. Under his leadership, the Sherman School of Excellence went from the second worst performing school in Illinois to become a national model and a catalyst for future turnaround efforts across the country. Lionel received his bachelor's degree from Northwestern University and his master's degree and doctoral from UIC. Please welcome Dr. Lionel Allen Jr.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
I have my mask off. I'm going to stay behind the invisible barrier. I'm going to get close to anyone. You guys doing okay today?
Yes.
I know there are other places you'd rather be. Hey, somebody say yes. Like, you're supposed to say, oh no, not at all. You're excited to be here. No, I get it. I was a teacher. I taught history at Oak Park and Forest High School. I remember being at Teacher Institute days, or school-wide PDs, or staff-wide PDs, and sitting there saying, there's 1,000 other places I would rather be right now. I have papers to grade. I want to get my classroom ready. And I got to sit up here and listen to somebody who knows nothing about me or about my school. So I get it. I know the audience that I'm standing in front of today. Still love y'all though. Here's what I want you to do right now. Turn to your neighbor, the person sitting closest to you. And I want you to talk about what you've learned about yourself, about your school, about the work of being an educator over the last 23 months. What have you learned about yourself, your school, or the work of being an educator over the last 23 months? If you're sitting by yourself, please scoot over to another table and talk to them. Got 3 minutes to do so. Thank you. Thank you. All right, what brave soul would be willing to share something that was discussed at their table? Maybe you share something that you offered to the conversation, or you share something that resonated with you. I would like 3 volunteers. 3 volunteers. Yes, ma'am.
We talked about what's in our control and what's not in our control, and not to get all excited and worked out over things that are not in our control.
Thank you very much. Not to stress out, not to kill ourselves over things that's not within our control. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Just that we found that we were pretty adaptable to, we found that we could adapt to whatever, the school was doing, whether we were remote or we came back and had half and half and things like that, but that we did find ways to make it work.
Yes. Adaptable, flexible, nimble, right? Going with the flow. Absolutely. Got another volunteer, someone from this side of the room. Yes, ma'am.
Tired, worn out.
That's real. That's not romanticizing what you've gone through over the last 2 years, right? You got a right to be tired, absolutely.
Teachers are resilient.
Yes, teachers are resilient. And who else is resilient? Yeah. Our students are resilient. And hopefully we've learned that. We've learned that. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. First of all, let me begin by just thanking Principal Swilly and his team for inviting me here this morning. Thankful to Phil Abraham and Dr. Ashley Carlson for having me here. I'm excited. I love to be around educators. Those of you that might be former athletes or weekend athletes now, you know the term, you're familiar with the term gym rat, right? These are guys who love being in the gym. They're working out, shooting hoops, whatever, working on their game. When I had 2 good knees, I probably was a gym rat. But now, I'm a school rat. Like, I like to be in schools. I like to be around educators because I love to learn. I love to hear people's stories, particularly teachers and school leaders. And I've struggled over the last 2 years because I've been relegated to sitting in front of a computer. Like, we've been Zooming like the Commodores, right? That's been my life. But I like to be amongst human beings. I like to feel the energy to be in this space. I'm a teacher. Like, I'm a teacher at heart. Regardless of the title says and all that stuff doesn't matter. In my core, when I accepted my calling to be a teacher at the age of about 15 or 16, like, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. I didn't envision that I would be standing in front of educators because I thought I would be the guy that would be the teacher for 25, 30 years. Like, I had this vision when I first started teaching that I would be able to say to a student, boy, I taught your dad, right? Or I taught your cousin. I thought I was going to be that guy. But hey, there was a different path for me that I've accepted. Extremely excited to be here. Let me set some expectations for what the next 50 minutes or so are going to look like. Let me begin by saying that I respect the expertise in the room. Like, I'm an outsider. I don't know any of you in here personally. I respect your work. I respect what you do. I respect your commitment. But I respect the expertise in this room. So everything that I'm going to share with you this morning, I want you to run through your lived experience. Meaning that I can't come in here and say, I know what works here, because I don't know. And I would never profess to know because I haven't spent enough time here getting to understand how the systems here work. I haven't had an opportunity to talk to students and to rub elbows with teachers. I haven't had that opportunity. So I'm not coming here as someone who's going to bring you some knowledge. What I do want to do is I want to share a couple of things that I've learned through my work with school leaders and teachers from across the state of Illinois, some lessons that we can glean from this pandemic. Some lessons that we can glean from this pandemic. But let me begin, though, by just saying thank you. You might say thank you for what? One, thank you for being here this morning. But thank you for coming back to this work. Like, there's so many people who are leaving the profession. Anybody know anyone who's left the profession in the last 2 years? Yeah. I had a former colleague of mine. I called her up one day during the pandemic. I said, hey, you know what? I've been a bad friend. what's up? What's going on? I haven't heard from you in a while. How's life? She says, you know what? I'm getting ready to see how long I can live out of my savings account. She was done. Decided to walk away from the profession. She was super sharp too. Right? It's a big loss. And I don't begrudge anybody that decided over the course of the last 2 years, you know what? I'm going to go try to sell cars. Because this ain't getting it for me anymore. I don't begrudge those people. But I want to highlight and amplify and celebrate those who have decided to come back despite everything that we've gone through. Again, I don't have to know your work intimately to know that you're making a huge sacrifice every day. This pandemic is unlike anything we've ever seen. There's no one walking the earth today who lived in 1918 who can say, oh yeah, when I was a leader or I was a teacher during the pandemic of 1918, this is how it went down. Right? Those people no longer exist. And so we are writing history as we are living through this moment. And so I'm appreciative of the fact that you decided to come back, to pull your boots up, tighten up your belt strap, and get back in the game. Right? I want to celebrate that. I'm grateful for that, and I want you all to know that. What I'm going to share with you this morning, you might not agree with, and that's cool. Like I don't come to spaces when I come to speak for people to always agree with me. And matter of fact, I'm not really here to inspire and motivate, because I don't know you well enough to know what motivates you or what inspires you. I also don't really want to inspire or motivate you because inspiration and motivation wear off. What I want to do this morning, though, is to say something to you that might make you just a little bit uncomfortable. To make you begin to reflect and ask some questions of yourself. So when you leave here, if you never think of me again, and you never think of the things that I shared with you this morning after today, then I failed. Then I failed. Because it's not about this moment. It's not about how you feel in this next 50 minutes. That's not what this is about. It's about what you do when you leave here. It's how you engage with colleagues after you leave here, how you engage with students after you leave here. Now, a lot of times when African American males are presenting to groups of educators about education, it's a story sob sad. And it's real. Right? Like black men have bad experiences in school at large. We know that anecdotally, we know that empirically. But that's not my story. I love school. I love school. I had a great experience. So when I'm talking to you this morning about things that we have learned from the pandemic and ways that we can shift from being in a mentality of we're just trying to survive, moving to a mentality of we're now thriving, is coming from a place of experience. I've seen what happens when schools thrive. I've seen what happens, I've witnessed what happens when schools do right by children. I've seen what happens when we sit and we engage in deep reflection on our practice so that we can get better at our craft individually so we can better serve kids. Like, that is my experience. So I'm not going to sit up here and tell you about how bad life was for me in schools and how I was diminished or none of that happened to me. School was a wonderful place for me. It affirmed me. It made me feel good about myself. It made me feel like I could be something other than just a basketball player. And most schools don't do that. For most children, I'm not just talking about black males, I'm talking about all kids. They don't feel that way in their schools. They don't feel affirmed. They don't feel loved or nurtured. When we ask students, is there one person in the school that you can go to that you trust almost 60% of students say no. They say no. And so what that does is that tells us that we got to start doing some things differently. What I hope that I can do today is help you to begin to see, to reflect on, to think about the ways in which you can begin to change your own practices. Not in dynamic or drastic ways, small ways. Things that we can begin to do tomorrow. That you don't have to sit through professional development to do. You don't have to pay any money to do. You don't have to go to the teacher store and spend a bunch of money out your own pocket to do. These are things that happen here. These are mindset shifts that we have to begin to make if we really are serious about educating all students well. And only you know how serious you are about that. And that's not to throw shade at anyone. Right? We say a lot of things in education that we don't mean. That's just the reality of it, right? We got a lot of buzzwords and acronyms floating around. Right? We love us some buzzwords, don't we? We do. Give me some buzzwords and put it all in your resume, you're going to get that job. All kids can learn. I use differentiation and all this stuff, but you know what differentiation means. We've been living in crises, man. We've been living in crises, for real, over the last 24 months. And here's what's different about the pandemic. Because it's not like we haven't lived, and dealt with crises before. There's a lot of things happening in our country that have been for years prior to the pandemic that have made educating students more difficult and more challenging. Would you all agree? Like that thing called social media? Do you hate social media? Oh, I'm so happy I'm not a teenager. Woo! I thank God every morning. Thank you for putting me in my 40s right now. I couldn't imagine being 15 years old these days. Man, okay, sorry, tangential, sorry. Okay. We've been living in crises. This is nothing new for us. But here's what's different about this pandemic. We don't get to escape the crises. Right? We're living through it, and we're working through it. I remember being a principal and working in a community that was impacted pretty frequently by gun violence, crises. Every time I turned around, I was going to a funeral. But when I left work, I can go home, shut my door. I'm not dealing with that. I'm not living that experience. Right? Pandemic is different. Not only are we having to flip classrooms and shift to remote learning, and look, you guys turned the school from a brick and mortar school to a virtual school in what, a weekend? Right, like Friday, right? Brick and mortar, Monday on the computer. If somebody had told you you were going to do that 5 years ago, you would have been like, yeah, right. There's no way, but you did it. You did it, right? So we're used to doing those types of things. We're used to doing and accomplishing what most people think can't be accomplished. But here's the deal. You don't get a chance to go home and disconnect from the pandemic. So not only are you flipping classrooms, dealing with COVID cases, some of you might be involved in contact tracing and all those things at work. When you go home, you might also be taking care of children who have been impacted by COVID. You might have family members that have been impacted by COVID. Maybe your loved ones have lost jobs because of COVID. So we don't get a break. And that's what makes this thing so stressful. It's suffocating because every time we turn around, we're dealing with something related to COVID. So I understand how hard it is because I'm living it too. But Winston Churchill tells us what? Don't let a good crisis go to waste. His charge was, let's take advantage of the crises and do something different. Let's take advantage of the crises and do something that's never been done before. How do we apply that to the field of education? Why can't we start to do things different? And I was excited at the very beginning of the pandemic because you had a lot of people saying things like, let's reimagine education. And I really thought we were going to do something different. I really did. I thought we were going to look at how we schedule students. I thought we were going to analyze seat time and all these sort of traditional structures that we have in place in our field. and started saying, you know what? The pandemic has taught us that we can do some things different. I was talking to Mark. Mark said, hey, look, one of the things that was revealed through this pandemic is that we don't use technology well. Right? We barely use. We have all these technological resources that we barely use. The pandemic forced us to use some of them, but we're still not operating at optimal capacity. But guess what? You come back to school in person and we're doing the same things we were doing 15 years ago. And then we act surprised when we get the same results. I'm just being real with you. You know, we blame the pandemic for everything. Everything. Look, I ain't trying to get political, but I used to laugh at people when they used to blame Trump for racism. Like Trump invented racism. No, that's not how that works. The pandemic is not responsible for the gross inequities that existed in our schools. They existed before the pandemic. What the pandemic did was forced us to actually pay attention to them. Why? Because the inequities got worse. The inequities got worse. But what are we going to do about it, though? How are we taking advantage of the crises? We're not. We're not. We regress to the mean. Let's go back to what we've always done. And then when the scores come out at the end of the year, we say, oh my goodness, this is unbelievable. Why? Why is it unbelievable? We're doing the same thing over and over again. We're getting ready to repeat the cycle. What I would like for us to begin to do is to have the courage to do things that we know are in the best interest of our children. And I know that that responsibility doesn't just sit with you. Like, I get it. Like, district folk got to be on board with this. The board has to be on board with it. The families and the community members have to be on board with it. But as people in the room, as men and women in the arena, you all know that what we've been doing is not working for every kid. It's working for some, but it's not working for every kid. So how do we begin to do things differently? How do we take advantage of these crises that we're dealing with? You know, a lot of times people equate experience and expertise, meaning, you know, you've been doing something for 15, 20, 30 years, and people automatically assume that you have a level of expertise in that particular field or job or whatever. And one of the things that we learned from this pandemic was life is valuable, precious, and all those things for sure. But at a level of professional responsibility, we learned that the table can be flipped over at any time and we don't have any control over it. So all those experiences that we had prior to the pandemic were really null and void when we were shifted to remote learning. It relegated everybody to novice status. It didn't matter how many years of experience you had. You had 25-year veteran teachers who were crying every day because they couldn't figure out how to make the shift. You had seasoned principals just not knowing exactly what to do or how to proceed. I mentioned to you all before that one of the things I'm afraid of or concerned with is that we're gonna get out of this pandemic eventually, and we won't be any better for it. And the reason why we won't be any better for it is because we're gonna chalk up that experience as something that made us tough. Yeah, we got through it. We're resilient. That's great. But what did we learn from it? John Dewey says, hey, you don't learn from experience. You learn from reflecting on those experiences. Which is why we started today having you reflect just a few minutes about what you learned over the last 2 years as you've worked inside the schools, as you supported students, you supported families. So what I want to go through now is just a couple of lessons learned that I hope will resonate with you. And again, you're not going to agree with everything that I say. I'm going to try to crystallize these lessons with a few examples. And again, I encourage you, as always, though, is to, take what I'm saying and run it through your own experiences. You have to make sense of the things that I'm saying. You have to make those connections, and I hope I can present them in a way where it's easy for you to do so. The first thing is, change is absolutely necessary. Change is absolutely necessary. And when change is necessary and we don't make the change, it becomes destructive. Why is that important for the context of this conversation today? Because we are so tied to, and I say we, I don't just mean the people in this room, I'm talking about people at large, educators in general. We are so tied to tradition and customs and ways of doing things that we have not been as innovative and creative as we need to be to support the students in our charge. If you took a picture of a classroom today and you compare this to a classroom from 1850, they look pretty similar. That's just one example of the lack of innovation in the field of education. And you might be sitting here saying, okay, so what does that have to do with me? What changes can we make to our practices to better engage the students that are in front of us? What changes can we make to our practices to better engage the students that's in front of us? And I get it, change is super hard. When we look at some of the research on change, one of the things that we know is that it conjures up feelings of bereavement, insecurity, loss, confusion. Like there's a myriad reasons why change is so difficult. In fact, we know that change is so difficult. I'll give you another example. Only 1 in 7 people, if told, if you don't change your diet, you're going to die, have the ability to actually change their diet. You're literally being told, if you don't change your diet, you're going to die, but change is so hard that I'm struggling to do that, knowing that my life is in jeopardy. But in the field of education, if we aren't willing to change, then what we're saying is we're fine with things being the way that they are. And my hope, and again, I don't know any of you individually, my hope is that nobody is satisfied with things being the way that they are. When we look at our achievement results, when we look at levels of student engagement, I'm hoping that nobody is satisfied with our current results. When we look at indicators of family engagement, when we see some of the inequities that exist within our schools, I'm hoping that everybody in this room who signed up to do this very important work of being a teacher or being a leader, I'm hoping that everybody is saying that this ain't good enough. It's not good enough. And it's not about pointing the finger at anyone. It's not about being negative. It's just about recognizing our reality. That if we really care about all the kids that come across our thresholds every day, that we realize that we have to start to do some things differently. We got to engage families in different ways. We got to engage students in different ways. We have to find ways to be more responsive to the needs of our students. And that education, the way it looked 5, 10 years ago, it doesn't look like that anymore. But one of the things that we know, and this doesn't have anything to do necessarily with just being a teacher, just being a human being, is that it's hard to make the shift. Everybody is trying to figure out ways to improve themselves, but it's difficult. That's why the gyms are so crowded in January. What happens in January? What happens in January? Yes, I'm making my New Year's resolutions. I'm going to get fit. Finally. January 2nd. Because, you know, January 1st is the holiday, so I can't work on that day. January 2nd, I'm at the gym, working out. And then come February 1st, what happens? You back in the McDonald's drive-thru. What happened to you? Change is difficult. Change is difficult. So let's apply that to our schools. Let's apply that to our schools. What are we doing differently today? What are we doing differently today when we compare it to 5, 6 years ago? Maybe we might be having different conversations. We might be having different conversations, We might be reading different books. Everybody's reading Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. That's on most people's book list. There's a bunch of books out there that we're now reading. But how is it impacting our actual practices? How is it impacting the way in which you communicate with kids and interact with your students? See, it's not about the professional development that we see. It's not about the book club that you participate in. It's about what we're doing in our classrooms. And so I get it. I get it. I understand how difficult it is. But one of the things that's come out of the pandemic is that if we aren't willing to change, then things are going to get worse in our schools. That this gap, this achievement gap, and I don't like how we framed it. I think the achievement gap is a mischaracterization of the problem, and I won't get into that right now. But I'll refer to it because everybody's familiar with it. But the gaps in performance that we see among students is only going to get worse. I'm sure you all are already seeing the results of students not being in school regularly. So if a student was already behind, where are they now? And are we going to keep teaching them the way we've always taught them, or are we going to find different ways to grow them academically, emotionally, and intellectually? That's a question we have to ask ourselves. And what are we willing to do? What are we willing to do? Last thing I'll say on this. I used to work with a teacher. I won't say her name. She might be somebody's cousin in here. Beginning of every year, we would meet in the copy room. I would be, making my copies for my beginning of class, like the first couple of days. And she would literally be making her copies for the entire year. I hope I ain't calling nobody out. I ain't like making this person up. This is a real person. The whole year. Now, that was good for her. She had everything mapped out the entire year. What about her students? What did that do to their experience? That she wasn't willing to make any change to meet their needs. And this is what happens. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone. We all fall victim to this. This is what happens. We prioritize our comfort and our convenience over what's best for kids. Because we're not willing to make the requisite changes that we need to make. I don't want to beat up on anyone here. I'm not trying to point the finger at anyone. But I am trying to get us to think that if we aren't willing to do this, we aren't willing to adapt. Someone said we're good at adapting and being flexible and adjusting. Then we have to continue to do those things because we know that it's in the best interest of our students. Lesson 2. It's all about relationships. That the art of teaching and disseminating knowledge and helping to develop the hearts and the minds of the young people that are in front of us comes down to how well we relate and develop relationships with the students in front of us. Does that make sense to everybody? Learning is a vulnerable process. Think about when you first learned to read. Probably in the laps of your mother or grandmother or father, someone who loved and cared for you, someone you trusted. Learning is a vulnerable experience. It requires you to have trust with the people that you're connecting with, that's teaching you something. If we don't have good relationships with our students, and again, this was something that was revealed through the pandemic. If we don't have good relationships with our students, we cannot educate them in the ways we want to educate them. Rita Pearson said this brilliantly in her TED Talk. She said, students don't learn from teachers that they don't like. And this ain't about being liked. I want to be very clear about that. And that's not what she meant, but that's what she said. But this isn't about trying to create friends and have a friendship with the kids. That's not what this is about. But it is about students recognizing that Miss So-and-so has my best interest in mind. That Mr. So-and-so loves and cares about me. And if I feel that way, I'm going to put down all of my barriers, And I'm going to be a sponge, and I'm going to be open and receptive to the learning that this teacher is trying to impart upon me. Does that make sense to everyone? It comes down to relationships. It comes down to relationships. When I was a teacher, I was at a school that was predominantly white. 30% of the student population was African American. And when I got there, they gave me a couple classes that had predominantly black boys in them. And I understood the power of relationships, so I spent the first couple weeks just getting to know those kids. Not trying to say that my content was so important that I gotta day one start talking to you about history. No. I began by having conversations with them so I could get to know who they were as young men, who they were as people. And then, and only then, could I begin to talk about history and historical concepts. Well, I had a teacher come up to me and say one day, she said, you know what? Those boys, who quite frankly were terrors in everybody else's classroom, she said to me, those boys don't give you any problems. She said, it must be because you're black and you're so big. True story, not making this up. And I was like, whoa, like this makes me feel really uncomfortable. But I'm gonna try to respond in a way that's professional. So I said to her, ma'am, you know, there are laws against putting your hands on kids. So it doesn't matter how big I am. But what I do have, each of these young men, is a positive relationship. They know that I care about them. And because they know I care about them, and because they trust me, they will run through a brick wall for me. That's why I don't have an issue with these young men. And it wasn't like they were angels with me, they weren't. They certainly didn't give me the same kind of grief that they gave her, like, yo. What's my point here? My point here is that the pandemic taught us the power and the potency of relationships. That in times of crises, when the world is upside down, if you don't have positive relationships with your students and their families, then you're not going to have the kind of impact that you want to have. They're not going to be as open and willing to go with the flow and move and give you grace. Why? Because you don't have relationships. So many of us got the education game twisted. We walk into classrooms like we are the owners of the knowledge. I'm the teacher, I'm in charge, sit down, shut up, and listen. That's not how it works. Not anymore. And I know maybe I'm not talking to anybody in here who thinks like that, and I hope that that is in fact the case. But one of the things that came out of the pandemic was we have to foster positive relationships with every kid. And let me be very clear, because I don't want to let anybody off the hook. I'm not just talking about black kids. This ain't just about black kids or Latino kids. Every kid needs to have a positive relationship with someone in the school. Every kid. If you're a white teacher, you got white kids in your room, you better be working to develop positive relationships with those kids too. Because just because a kid is not misbehaving, just because a kid is getting good grades, doesn't mean that they feel good about being in this school. And people are like, well, you know, I don't know, I can't connect with black kids. It ain't about that. They're kids. They're kids. We got to make an effort to connect with the students, even if we don't have a cultural connection with them. When I was hired, I thought that they were hiring me to be the teacher for the black kids in the building. Because there was only a handful of black teachers in the school. I knew the game. Oh, that's cool. I'm good with that. But you know what I found out when I got there? That the white students who lived in River Forest, who summered in the Hamptons and had nannies, needed a positive relationship with me just as much as my black kids who are stone's throw from the west side of Chicago. And so I had to change my mindset. I'm not just here for black kids. I would be their biggest advocate for sure, because they need an advocate. But the white kids who need somebody to talk to, because they don't have any time to spend with their parents aren't spending any time with them because they're working all day at the law firm, like they need somebody that they can relate to as well. And matter of fact, I found that some of them needed more than I was able to give. Relationships. If we were at a real estate convention, we would be talking about location, location, location. You want to sell properties I'm near water, with great views. Because I'm here in a room full of educators, it's all about relationships. And for folks who don't understand how important that is, they struggle in this profession. You're going to struggle. If you think that just because they call you by your last name, you got a degree from whatever university, the kids are going to sit there and listen to you, yeah, right. They don't care nothing about that. They want to know if you can. They don't care if you got a degree at all. They don't. They don't have a frame of reference for Princeton versus Chicago State versus Olive Harvard. Okay, whatever. Cool. But do you care about me and can I trust you? Do you care about me and can I trust you? That's what they care about. That's what they care about. And let me be clear. I'm going to say this again. White folks, white teachers can connect with black kids. I've seen it. I've seen it. It happens. But we got to be willing to do it. We got to be willing to change our mindsets. Remember how important this is. If you got kids in your classroom that are giving you problems, have lunch with them. Have them stay after school and have a conversation with them. I used to use that strategy all the time with teachers. They come in crying, I just can't connect, Jamal's driving me crazy, I'm about to quit. Let's go have lunch with Jamal. Changes the dynamic. Go see them play basketball. Go to the piano recital. Do something that shows that you were invested in them outside of school. Changes the relationship. I had a kid, his name was Rob. Real quiet white kid in my classroom. Sweet dude, I didn't connect with him. Real quiet, didn't participate in class. Found out that he was a gifted pianist. I want to see him play. Go to the recital. You know, I stayed long enough for me to listen to him play and for him to see me. Hey man, great job. Changed our relationship. All of a sudden now he's engaged in my classroom. Raising his hand, participating. Who would have thought? All I did was go spend 15 minutes at a piano recital. Didn't cost me $1. I didn't have to go sit through a PD. I didn't have to go buy another book. Right? I just have to invest in the kid. Show the kid that I care. Relationships. Can't say that enough. I can't say that enough. It is the cure for all the ills that you have in your classroom. Whatever's going on. Problem behaviors, etc. Yeah, we know that there are kids who, you know, they're going through some things that require a little bit more than we can give. I'm not talking about those students. I'm talking about the students who are disruptive, disengaged, who don't care about your class. They don't care about your class because they don't care about you. You got to make them care about you. You got to make them feel like I can't let Miss So-and-so down. I can't let Miss So-and-so, I can't let Mr. So-and-so down. They've done too much for me. They invested too much in me. They love me too much. That's what this is about. Relationships is king here. Lesson 3. Families matter. Families matter. We cannot do the work that we want to do without the authentic engagement of our parent community. This isn't new. Like this just didn't come out. But the power dynamic has shifted. Why did it shift? Because of the pandemic. We have to rely on our families in ways that we never had to rely on them before. Does that resonate with people? Is that true? Yes, I'm asking. Yes. And why is that? Somebody tell me why we have to rely on our families. Somebody tell me why. Yes, ma'am.
They were at home.
Yeah.
With our students.
And so what did that mean?
They were the teacher in some aspects.
Yes, we had to give up control. We had to give up control. But guess what else we learned? That if we didn't have good partnerships with our families already in place, when the pandemic hit and we didn't have to rely on them, things were much more difficult than they needed to be. Because parents who didn't have a good relationship with the school, they weren't trying to partner. It's too late now. It's like you gave me the stiff arm, you never spoke to me, now you need me, now all of a sudden you want to talk. We've been there on an individual level. People who play you to the left all the time, and then when they need something for you, they call you, girl, where you been? Don't call me now. You don't even talk to me. You didn't return my last 3 calls. I'm not even in the JMU meeting. That's how it was with our families. The power dynamic shifted. Some of us, and I'm not clean here. When I was a principal, I didn't engage my families in authentic ways like I should have. In some instances, I saw my families as a barrier to get to the kid. I'm just being honest. But that's a flawed approach. That if we want to support all of our students and give them what we need, we have to start seeing our families as what? Assets. We have to see our families as assets. Who knows a child better than his mother? Or his grandmother, or his father? Or whomever is raising him? Who knows that child better? But how often do we reach out to those families and say, tell me something about your child? And I'm talking about before we're calling to say that Shorty is out of control. At that point, it's too late. I'm saying before things get out of control, how often are we calling families to say, tell me about your child? Why? Because you are the expert on John. You know John better than anyone. How can I, as a teacher, support John? Now, we had to do that a little bit during the pandemic. Why? Because now they were at home. And we were relying on families to create the conditions for that child to be successful while learning at home. But had we not been connecting with families before the pandemic, where we built those trusting relationships, they weren't interested in what you had to say about their home. Don't tell me how to raise my child. You don't know anything about me. And we saw example after example after example of schools that had done this work, that had been welcoming to all families, who saw the parent-school partnership as an equal partnership, that engaged in authentic collaboration with their families. Schools who did these things had a pretty seamless transition to at-home learning. And the schools who said parents stay out struggled mightily. Struggled mightily. So what I'm encouraging you to do, one of the things that we learned from this pandemic is that our families matter. And I'm talking about all families. Because again, I'm just going to try to speak truth here, right? Like, we know how this is done. We know that certain families got the juice in the district, in the neighborhoods. That certain families can come up here and make a complaint and things get moving real quick, and other families are not even welcome. At least they don't feel welcome. We know how that's played. But are we, particularly with our most marginalized families, are we welcoming all families to the conversation? Do we see all of our families as assets? Do we see them all as equal partners in the education of their children? And if the answer to that is no, we got to make some mental shifts. We got to change how we think. We have to change how we think. Again, I'm embarrassed to say that when I first walked into my school as principal, one of the first things that I did was get rid of the parent room. Because I came in with a deficit mindset. I immediately thought about not how I can make this parent room work for kids. I immediately thought, no, I have a bunch of parents hanging out here in the hallway all day, can't do that. No, gotta go. And I said it with pride. I'm getting rid of the parent room. And now I feel like a dodo head. But I had to go through and reflect on my experiences before I came to that realization that wasn't the right way to do that. That what we're going to do is we're going to embrace our parents. So who knows what's coming? We might have to go back to students learning at home. And if we don't have those solid family bonds established, solid community bonds established, it's going to make that transition that much more difficult. How much time do I have though, sir? Okay. 17. All right, cool. I'm going to do it in 15. I'll give you extra 2 minutes. Time to go back to you. All right, I'm gonna say something here that I think most people probably won't agree with. Oh, they'll get me in trouble with the bishop. Y'all don't see me again, you know why, right? Any college football fans in here? Yeah. Any Alabama fans? No. Like, oh, it's like throwing down. I see you. Any Nick Saban fans? Okay. I'm not a big college football fan. I mean, I'll watch it. But I'm a fan of coaches that I see as being great leaders who have a track record of success. You can't argue with Nick Saban's success. One of the things that he says pretty frequently is results are a distraction. He says that results are a distraction. And when we start talking about how many games we won, how many games we lost, that distracts your attention from what's important. He would say what's important is the process. It's how hard are you practicing? Are your practices of quality? Are you practicing proper nutrition? Are you getting the right sleep? All of those things are the things that matter. And so you might be saying, what the heck does that have to do with education? Testing results are a distraction. And I know that people love to put a laser-like focus on test scores. But look, I've been in education for a long time. Some of you might have been in education longer than me. And when I go out, and I'm in the streets and I run into students, and I love it. I love when I run into students. I've never had one student come up to me and say, Mr. Allen, I just remember that test prep that you put me through. Like, if not for you, I wouldn't have grown 4 percentile on that literacy assessment. Nobody's ever looked at me with tears in their eyes and said, woo, you really helped me get my test scores up. Yes! You're the man. It was Lionel Allen Jr. who said, people won't remember what you say, they will remember how you make them feel. All right? If we were to ask our students how they feel in our presence, what would they say? It's nobody's fault, man. It's the fault of the entire educational landscape. That we put so much emphasis on things that can be measured. We put so much emphasis on things that are quantifiable, and we've taken the joy out of school. Great experiences matter. I don't remember, I'm older now, you know, but you know what I remember about school? 3rd grade, I made a diorama. Anybody else make a diorama? Okay, I see you. Dioramas. Hey, it was one of the best things I've ever done. I mean, like, I read a book. I had to construct a 3-dimensional model of a scene from the book. It was like the best thing ever. And guess what? Like, I remember the book. Kids don't make dioramas no more. You know, we doing drill and kill. Everything we do is about getting some test score up. Kids aren't feeling good, man, about being in our schools. Forget about test scores. Yeah, we got kids who are knocking out of the park, for sure, I get it. But what they care about, what kids really want, they want to have a good experience in school. They want to have some fun. They want to engage in lessons where they can, like, get up and talk and be active. They want to, like, act out a scene from Shakespeare. Like, that's what they want to do. That's what makes school memorable. We got it twisted. We focus so much on the result that we forget that these aren't robots. Like, we're responsible for their academic and intellectual growth. How do we create experiences that shape the whole child? Where they can bring all of their talents to the table. Where they can show mastery and proficiency in many, many different ways. But all we have seemed to care about for the last 50 years is test scores.
educators, is to think about how we can improve the experiences of our children in every single classroom. Look, I get it. There are certain things that's not within your control. But you know what I miss most about teaching? Somebody asked me what I miss most. Somebody asked me. What I miss? Thank you. I miss closing my door, my 25 to 30 kids, and it just being me and them, creating our own world. I didn't care what was happening out in the hallway, down the street, or whatever. It was about us in that moment, for those 50 minutes. I control the experiences that they had with me. I couldn't control what happened next door, but I could control what was happening here. I couldn't control district policy, but I could control what was happening in my classroom for those 50 minutes. To make sure that the learning that we were engaged in, not only was it helping to make them smarter, but it was helping to make them thinkers, and that they enjoyed the experience. Even the kids who did nothing enjoyed my class. Because we focused on the experience. And guess what? If we make the experiences what they need to do, we make these experiences holistic, and we bring some joy back to school, they will succeed in ways that are quantifiable. But we're so caught up on this, I gotta get these scores up, that man, school has become boring. And look, the pandemic has taught us this, right? Like, they know now, I don't really have to come to school if it's gonna be boring. I can stay home. I can do this on the computer with the camera off. It was ceiling, man, check that out. Like, excuse me, where are you? Like, they know now. I don't really have to come into the school building to get smarter. Give me another, you know, my kids miss, I got sons, school age kids, I got a senior and I got a third grader. We can talk about that gap later. But you know what they miss most about being? They didn't miss like instruction, no. They missed their friends. They missed the social aspects of school. Because they knew like this teaching right here, like, I mean, this is cool, but you know, like, I don't think it's gonna be that much better coming back to school actually. That's what my senior said. I don't really think like it's gonna be that much more engaging when I go back to school. That's sad. That's sad. We gotta give kids a reason to want to come to school every day. Celebrate them, make them feel good. Let's have some fun. Let's laugh. Let's play like these are kids. I laugh at people when they get so caught up in, you know, like tardy policies and things like that. Like these kids are adults. Like, no, look, they're 12, man. Like, they're 9. We really gonna have like give a 9-year-old 12 zeros when they do their homework? Like what? I mean, help me understand that. And again, I'm talking about myself. I was a teacher that gave a lot of zeros. And I was proud of it. Like, you know, I hate to admit, don't tell nobody. Is this being recorded? Was it too much here? What's going on? Like, they're kids. Even the 8th grader that's 6'2" and 200 pounds is still a little kid who still wants to be loved on and cared for and come to school and have fun, have a joyous experience to enhance their learning. Great experiences come out. All right, last one. I encourage all of you, not just today, not tomorrow, frequently, is to reflect on why you signed up to do this. Remember your why. Why you decided to be an educator. Now, I don't know if this happened to somebody, come tell me, write me a note, I can deal with it. I don't think anybody was like forced into teaching, or like, you're gonna teach. I don't think that happened to anyone, did it? I'm asking. No. We all made a choice, right? We don't have to do this, right? We can do other stuff, yes? Everybody feels like they're employable in other areas? No, but you know what? We get to do this. You don't have to do it. This is a privilege. Somebody is trusting you with their children, their most precious resource, their most precious, I hate to call them possessions, but you know, count them. I tell my kid, you belong to me. Look at you. Don't get it twisted. When we go in the store, you gotta give them the speech, you know what I'm saying? Don't make a fool out of me. People are trusting their kids to you. That's a privilege. It's a privilege. But you gotta ask yourselves, why you signed up to do this anyway? Because you know this job will change you. It'll turn you into something that you're not. Because it's so hard and so complex. So in those moments when we feel overwhelmed, and we feel like, I don't know if I have enough to get out of bed this morning. I don't know if I have enough to walk through the doors of that school. Remember why you do this. You didn't get into this profession to be mean to kids. You didn't get in this profession to fail kids. You didn't get into this profession to make kids feel bad about themselves. No, none of us did. That doesn't mean that we're not going to make mistakes. But we all got into this profession for the right reason. And then conditions in the environment, which are so strong, can sometimes reshape you and reform you in ways that's like, that's not who I am. That's not who I started out as. You know, nobody comes into the profession like, man, I can't wait, I'm gonna fail every kid. Ooh, I can't wait. I'm gonna be a horrible teacher. Kids ain't gonna learn nothing in my class. I guarantee it. Nobody gets into the work for that. We get into it because we care about kids. Look, this is a calling. And you called to do this, man. You don't just like wake up one day like, I guess I'll teach. I mean, I guess some people do. But I know that that's not the story of everybody in here. You could have done, you could have been an attorney, you could have been a doctor, or whatever. Ran your own business. But you chose this profession for a reason. Like, don't let the circumstances turn you into somebody that you're not. Don't let community pressure and other external pressures turn you into an educator that you're not proud of. Because think about this. 10, 15 years from now, the students who graduated from your classroom, they're going to be sitting around talking about you. Like, what they going to say? Straight up, what they going to say? What they going to say about you? That's a question that you have to ask yourself. What do you want your students to say about you 10, 15 years from now? They're talking to their own children about their school experiences. How will they refer to you? Will they refer to you as somebody who made them feel good, or will they refer to you as somebody who made them hate school? Because that's the kind of power you have. That's the kind of power you have. We all remember our favorite teachers. We also remember the teachers who made us feel bad, who we would run from. That's the kind of power you have. So I want us to think about how we want our students to remember us, how we want to craft the experiences in our classrooms, in our schools at large that make kids feel good about coming to school every day. Like, we gotta find ways to engage kids differently than we have in the past, because they now know, I don't really need to come into the school. This is all I'm gonna get. Give me the remote option. You know, they'll self-select out. And we've seen it across the board, particularly in high schools. They have a little bit more autonomy. Yeah, I don't need to go into the school for that. Attendance rates are dropping everywhere. There's social issues popping up everywhere in schools. Because they're making some decisions. Now, the babies can't make those decisions, not yet. Let's give our kids a reason to be here. Last thought, and I promise you I'll let you go. This is taken from research of 10,000 employees, people who are supervised. It asks a basic question. What is it that you need from your followers, your leaders? What do you need from your leaders? What do you want? They said these 4 things. Trust, compassion, stability, and hope. That's what they need. Why am I presenting this to you today? Because as educators, you are leaders. You are leaders of your classrooms. You have carved out your own domains. Those of you who teach self-contained classes, you have those babies all day. They're yours. from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. You are the leader of that community. Remember what your babies need from you. Remember what your children need from you and what they want from you. Imagine if every teacher said, I am going to make sure that I establish trust with my students, that I am compassionate towards my students. Now I'm throwing another word, empathetic. Right? I am going to provide a sense of stability in this classroom and predictability. I'm going to add another word. And I'm going to create a space where my students feel hopeful. Imagine if every teacher committed to doing these 4 things. What type of learning environment we would have with our students. I don't know if I said anything today that resonated with anyone. I hope that I did. But what I hope you walk away with is this. Great schools start with great teachers and great leaders. And that while in these times of uncertainty, you might feel like there's so much that you don't control, but the reality is there is so much that you do control. You control the academic experiences, academic lives of every child that walks through these doors. Every single child. You are in charge. And if we want to take our schools from where they currently are to where we say we want them to be, then we got to start reflecting on what's happened in the past, thinking about the work of being an educator about differently, and prioritizing the experiences of our children so that every child that walks through these doors feels good about being here every day. Thank you all so much. You've been a great audience. I think only one person fell asleep. I think.
It wasn't me. We all say thank you to Dr. Allen for